Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to 24 Years Later, Our Women's Rights, Human Rights. I'm Lyric Thompson. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy for the International Center for Research on Women. We're coming to you live on Women Deliver Live, and we're also here in the room and delighted to be on the beautiful Vancouver Bay. We have so much to cover and only an hour to cover it in. Today we're going to be exploring what is the progress that we've made as a movement since Beijing? Where have we encountered backlash and even seen rights negotiated away? And how is the world preparing for marking the anniversary next year? Where are we going to plug in as a feminist movement and feminist movements? And how are we going to learn from where we have seen backlash and try to avoid some of that moving forward? So tall order. We'll start, we'll actually hear some opening remarks from Michelle Bachelet, who was the inaugural executive director of UN Women, and is now the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. So her career, and of course she was the first female president of Chile, so her career is very much at the intersection of these issues. She couldn't be here with us today in person, but we'll hear from her on the tape. And then we will have a panel discussion where we will dig in on some of those pieces, and I'll introduce our panelists as they speak. We'll have some kind of quick back and forth in the panel, and then we want to spend copious amounts of time with you and your questions and what you're thinking about, what you're planning, and how you might plug in for this major anniversary that we're preparing for here about exactly a year from now. So without further ado, let us begin.
Dear friends, thank you for this opportunity to honor women's skills, our energy and experience, our strength, our spirit, and our ongoing struggle for full human rights for everyone. Thank you for coming together as activists to mobilize and build coalitions, to broaden the scope and impact of the work we're doing. Women's equality and rights are guaranteed under international law. Over 70 years ago, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaimed equal dignity and rights for all human beings without discrimination. Since then, states have reaffirmed equality between women and men and agreed by treaty to prohibit discrimination based on sex. The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, which turns 40 this year, clearly articulated the need to eliminate discrimination against women in every field, from education to health, to the political arena and the workplace. But the struggle to achieve this elementary justice, this very basic fairness of equal opportunities, have been an arduous one, and it is far from over. For decades, human rights violations and abuses inflicted on women and girls were overlooked, even among the human rights community, dismissed as family matters, or viewed as unchangeable cultural issues. To many, it was not clear that women's rights are human rights, until they was proclaimed by movements from around the world at the Vienna World Conference in 1993. Subsequent world conferences in the 90s, in particular the Cairo Conference on Population and Development and the Beijing Conference on Women, continued to translate commitments into solid action points for sexual and reproductive rights and gender equality. This year and next, we will mark the quarter century of these important historic agreements. Important progress has been made in the course of these 25 years in terms of dismantling discriminatory laws and practices and picking apart the demeaning stereotypes which are the glue that keeps discrimination in place. Millions of individuals have been freed to make their own decisions. My own path has been built upon the gains made by activists who insisted on women's rights in the workplace and in politics. When I was a girl, it was unimaginable that one day I would run for, let alone become, President of Chile. For that matter, I never expected to become my country's Minister of Health or Minister of Defense or the head of a UN body. Empowered women and girls contribute to better outcomes for their families and communities, and to positive social change across their countries. It is troubling to see pushbacks in some countries. There seems to be a renewed obsession with controlling and limiting women's decisions over their bodies and lives, and also by views that a woman's role should be essentially restricted to reproduction and the family. Women are still much poorer than men. They have less property, fewer opportunities, less access to basic services such as education, and a lot less freedom to raise their voices and make their own choices. We need to come together, women and men, to protect the important gains of the past, and we need to push forward to advance the rights of women and better solutions for the world. Because this planet belongs to all of us. Because ending discrimination against women and girls will bring us closer to achieving sustainable development. Because to end inequalities and poverty, we need to free girls to make their own choices. To improve governance and boost stability, we need to tear down the obstacles that hold back women's participation. To address climate change effectively by influencing how we eat, how we produce, how we build, how we move, how we manage waste, we need to uphold women's rights. To shape peaceful and secure society, we have to empower girls and women to participate fairly and fully in society. Gender equality is the precondition for meeting the challenges of promoting resilient and sustainable development and building better policy. Today, women are mobilizing again, as we always have, not only for our own rights, but in every kind of movement for human dignity and equality. I'm inspired daily by the women and girl activists who defend human rights around the world. I wish I could be with you to share your discussions, and I count on you to carry forward our shared ideas. Great success in this meeting.
So I think that's a pretty perfect framing for us to then begin our panel discussion, where we'll dig in on some of those issues, some of the backlash and also some of the victories. I'd like to start with some of the victories, although I understand it's complicated, by asking Jama, who is one of our Women's Leader young leaders, who is here representing an NGO, Think Women, and who has a great deal of experience campaigning on FGM, to tell us a little bit about it. In my mind, it seems like this is an area where we have seen some progress in terms of we have Target 5.3 in the Sustainable Development Goals that is tackling FGM and child marriage. It seems like there are more and more communities and countries that are saying we will end FGM, and we have seen evidence that that's working in a lot of ways. So tell us a little bit about the good news, where we've arrived in the last 24 years, but by all means, feel free to tell us what you're worried about and challenges as well.
I think it's always great to start on a positive note. And with regards to FGM, I would say yes, we have seen a lot of progress at different levels on the global stage. We've seen it being integrated as part of the SDGs, with it being explicitly stated in Target 5.3. This is not political will we used to have before. FGM is something nobody wanted to talk about. At national levels, we're seeing a lot of countries adopting legislation prohibiting the practice of FGM in their countries. Whether these laws are being implemented is a completely different question, but it shows a bit of a political will to begin to address the problem of FGM in the countries. Down to the community levels where these practices happen, I think this is where we're seeing a lot more progress, and I'll get into some of the experiences we have working with practicing communities. But before that, I'd just like to say all of the progress we see, all of the positive outcomes we're seeing is as a result of a lot of collaboration and a lot of partnerships among institutions, organizations, individuals, governments, also community members. We have seen a lot of coalitions being built. We have seen a lot of governments coming together to commit funding even. We've seen international organizations also take up the responsibility to say, we're going to invest in this fight. And so there's been a lot of collaboration and partnership that has gone towards this work. And that leads me to the point of what we are seeing in our context. And because I'm a young person on this panel, I'll talk about the work that's being done by young people, especially in countries where prevalence of FGM is very high. I come from the Gambia, where over 76% of women and girls aged between 15 to 34 have undergone FGM. So that's like the majority of women in my country have undergone FGM. But in 2015, we saw legislation passed to ban the practice. The law is not really doing very well. We haven't seen any prosecutions happen. We haven't seen any justice come into play, even though we know the practice could still be happening in the country. But what we are seeing is a very vibrant movement of young people standing up to say, we're going to end FGM in our generation. And the generational opportunity here is that we have a lot of them who have undergone FGM, who are survivors, who have their own stories, but they're standing up to say, in my family, the cycle ends with me. So they're making commitments to say, my children are going to be protected, my daughters are going to be protected, the girls in my family are going to be protected, and she is one of them. They are going to be protected. And so that ends it. And this is what we are seeing. But a lot of this is coming out of opportunities that are provided by organizations that are willing to believe in young people and the capacity we have to create change. One of these organizations, for example, is the Girl Generation, which took what we probably would call a risk to fund the work that is being done by young people in the communities where this practice happens. And so what has happened is organizations that would ordinarily not work on FGM because of how sensitive it was began to receive training, a lot of sensitization, but also funding opportunities to get into the communities and engage. And that also leads me to the issue of how we engage. And I think this has contributed really greatly to the progress we've been able to register. In the past years, we would go into communities and talk down at people and tell them about how barbaric this practice is and about how horrible they are for doing this to their girls. But in the past few years, the language has changed, the tone has changed, the approach has changed, to adopt a more engaging approach where you are talking to people. Yes, the stance still remains. FGM is a violation of the rights of women and girls. It should stop. But you're doing this also in recognition of the cultural norms and values that these societies hold very dear to themselves. And what we are seeing is when we engage respectfully, when we engage taking into consideration these values, they are more willing to talk to us. They're more willing to let us into their communities. We've seen instances in the past where you go and try to sensitize people and educate, and they chase you out of their communities. That is not happening now. And I think it's because of how we are couching our messaging. It's because of how we're approaching these communities and building relationships with them. So it's also not just a one-off case where you go tell them about everything you know and then leave the communities. But what's happening in the communities as well, and being championed by youth organizations in the Gambia, is a lot of the organizations are based in the urban areas. And prevalence is higher in the rural areas of the country. And this applies for a lot of other countries where FGM is practiced. And the model that a lot of organizations and individuals are adopting is not to leave your base and go into a community, talk to them and pack your bags and live. What we're doing is we go into these communities, we look at young people in the communities who are already leading some form of change, and we work with them. We look at the issues of capacity building, we engage them, we try to understand what happens in their communities, and we adopt them as partners in the work that we do. So when we leave, the work still continues, and that is how the change is really happening in these communities. Another thing is having survivors of FGM standing up and saying, I am going to use my story to lead the change that we want. And this has really made a very big difference. Previously, you would come and talk about FGM and perhaps its effect on, or it's linked to maternal mortality, for example, or complications at childbirth. And people would tell you, show me someone who's living from these complications. So everybody wanted proof. And at some point, some of the images we had, some of the stories we had were not coming from our communities. So we've arrived at a point where survivors themselves are standing up and saying, this happened to me, it's a reality, these are the complications I'm going through, and so I am going to use my story to talk to my people. So when you have people who look like you, talk to you in the language you understand, they're more likely to listen to you. They are more likely to adopt the messages that you are sharing. And so it's been a lot of factors, a lot of issues coming into play. Social media has played a very, very huge role. I think the end FGM hashtag is one of the biggest hashtags on Twitter, for example. You click that, there's a lot of information coming in from so many countries where FGM is being practiced. And it's a way for us to also look at what's happening in other areas, how can we adopt the work they're doing to our own specific context. So a lot of progress has been made, a lot of work is being done. Young people have now taken on the baton and said, we're going to take leadership. We understand that we have a unique opportunity. If we're talking about ending FGM in 2030, we can't do business as usual. Things need to change. But like you said, we're talking about a lot of pushback when it comes to women's rights. And FGM, unfortunately, is not exempt from that pushback. It's been there for ages. I mean, we've had to fight really hard. I like to give the example of how my mother has been fighting the same issue, and here I am today doing the same thing. I do not want to have a daughter who's going to do the same thing. And the pushback is there. There's still a lot of communities who do not want to even engage or listen at all. Law enforcement, I like to say, the law is enforced by people who come from our communities, people who sometimes subscribe to these same cultures. So if you have a police officer who's supposed to handle a case of FGM, and this is a person who believes FGM is right because of religious or cultural reasons, that is not a person who's going to lead the change. So we have a lot of work to do. Legislation is good, it's not enough. Sensitization works a lot. When communities stand up and say, we're going to take a stand and protect our girls, that's where we're seeing the real change. Thank you.
Fantastic. So community-led, survivor-led, legislation is good, but legislation and. I'd like to now turn to my friend, Dr. Mabel Bianco. She's the president of the Fundación para Estudio y Investigación de la Mujer, which is turning 30 this year, and she has buttons for you if you're interested. She's very, very good at branding. And Mabel, you have been working for your career on an issue set, well, on all rights, but particularly on an issue set that we've seen some of the most severe and visible backlash, which is sexual and reproductive health and rights. You're from Argentina. You were involved with the abortion legislation there. Of course, at the same time as what happened in Argentina, we did have a victory in Ireland. And that's a much broader spectrum of rights, of course, than just abortion, but that's top of mind for me coming from the United States right now. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of diagnosing the backlash, our rights being negotiated away. You're at CSW, you're at your national context. How are you seeing these things ladder up as someone who recalls Beijing and is now starting to think about what we're going to do next year?
Well, thank you. And I want to start saying that, as you know, in Latin America and the Caribbean, the women's movement is a strong one since many years. So we started to fight very, very strongly for the Cairo. We win in Cairo, but it was not full in this because we have only reproductive rights and health. We couldn't incorporate sexual rights. This was something they said, well, not they are involved in reproductive. We don't like, but this is the issue. And the other point is that we agree in Cairo. We have had a long discussion and very hard about abortion. And we agree in the form to say that still we are paying. I'm so sorry to say. Because we say, well, it's going to be according to the national laws. In Latin America and the Caribbean, specifically in Latin America, all our laws are against safe abortion, okay? So for us, it's a problem there that still, because this is a language still we are talking also in CSW and so on, because it's agree language. This agree language, we need to destroy it, sorry to say, because it's a catch-22, okay? We are there and we couldn't move on that. So in the region, I'm not only talking of, in Beijing, it was great because there we could put sexual rights for the first time. Of course, in those days, we were not talking about same-sex marriage and not only sexual identity. It was there, but we didn't say anything of that. We were saying about others and more broad sense. But it was accepted. This is an important issue. We need to say it. We went 1 year later. When we came back to our countries in Latin America, I think we advanced a lot, specifically in laws. We are very, very law-active people. We pass many laws. The problem is how the laws are going to benefit the women, the real women, because implementation is the problem in our countries. The laws are there, very nice, very elegant there, in books there, but for us to pick up them and to be reality, not. It's very difficult. But meanwhile, we advance a lot in reproductive health services, especially family planning. We advance something on comprehensive sexuality education, also laws. Now the last one was last week in Mexico, okay? So now we have a law, they pass a law in Mexico. We have had a law since in Argentina, 2006, and it still is not a reality for the girls and the boys in the schools. So it's not only the law, we need to, and now we have all the people from your country, I must say, coming and bringing money and support to all those groups, religious groups specifically, new evangelical groups, that they are saying, don't be with our children. So they are not going to be to schools, because if not in the school, they are learning history. And history has an interpretation that maybe is not agree with their parents. And of course, on sexuality, they say, oh, no, 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 this is impossible. But at home, girls are abused by their own parents or their families. So we need to say, we are saying in our country since 25 years that the worst and more dangerous place for girls is the house, because there are abuse, and this abuse is not recognized because no family want to recognize that they abuse their girls. So this is a problem we have, and we need to recognize. So comprehensive sexuality education is so important because it's a way to change what we believe is to be a man or a woman or another gender identity. This is the key issue, if we haven't that. So now, in Argentina, boys are talking about toxic masculinity. So, and also some other diversity issues. I can't follow them. We have a network in foundation with young adolescents and young people, and all days they bring new things. I can't follow them. It's very complicated. But what I know is now they are saying, we don't want anymore these models to be men. We don't want anymore. And this is a very good issue. But coming back to the issue of abortion, because it's what I want to say, in those years, the backlash is so big in Latin America. In 5 countries in Central America, from the 7 countries that abortion is always forbidden, 5 are in Central America. And they were in the last 5 or 7 years. This is a backlash, very terrible. And well, you must say, but we have some advances. Yes, we have in Mexico City. No, Mexico is an example, but Mexico City, nothing else. No, the whole country. We have in Uruguay, we have in Guyana, and nothing else. And last year, we fight a lot in the Congress to have our voluntary interruption of pregnancies as a law in Argentina. This is our signal, the green scarf. This is our, we fight, and we are going to see a lot of people here. Yeah. We use in our mochilas, we use in our hands, in our arms, saying that we are, and these are boys, are girls, are men, are women. Meanwhile, we are on the street fighting, we are saying this needs to be, but still in the Congress we couldn't pass it. Why? Well, there is the conservatives, especially in the Senate, where we have the senators from the north of our country, northeast, northwest, where they are really very, very conservatives, and they don't pass it. But what was the change? And this is what I want to bring here. In 2015, it was a great movement in Ni Una Menos, no one less. It was a mobilization, the 3rd June, against femicides. It was big, huge, in all the cities. You can imagine boys, girls, elderly people, everybody say no more women killed, please, to be women. But there we put together other forms of violence as abortion, unsafe abortion, to be denying an abortion to a woman, to oblige them to continue a pregnancy that they couldn't follow, especially if it's a rape or something like that, is a torture, is a violence, really. So when we put in such a way, the young people, boys and girls, started to realize, so they became massive, and now they know more than us as a feminist theory, I must say. It's so great that when I was invited to speak about that, they know so much. I said, well, please give me a lecture, because it's so good. Because when we start this fight, we were 10, 50 people, women and nobody else. And so now there are a lot of them, they believe this is an injustice. They are claiming for that. And this is a way, I must say, we must take some lessons learned. We need to put the issues of violence, all forms of violence, as a violence and a violation of human rights and women's rights. And the young people are picking up, and they are defenders. So if it's not going to be law this year or the next, it's going to be soon, because they are requesting. They are not us. They are requesting, and they are not going to accept, and they are going to vote those people that would ensure them that the law is going to pass. Because we have elections this year, so we put the issue of abortion for the candidates, and I think, of course, there are some ones that not, but there are many others that are going to look, well, let's see, because could be we lost votes. Because they used to say that they lose votes, and this is not true. So I think this is where we are in Latin America. I must say it's a pity here. We have so few Latin Americans, and especially young women. We have strong young women there in all our countries. Here they are not. I'm so sorry, because we are completely absent. I'm an old person, I can come, but this is not important. There are those others, that there are millions there, and they are fighting for their rights and pushing, and really stronger than what we were. So I hope the next Women Deliver, we are going to have more Latin America and the Caribbeans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabel. So the power of youth, of alliances, of organizing, and it sounds like this is to be continued in Argentina. I'd like to turn to my friend Brian Heilman now, who's the Senior Research Officer at Promundo and a former ICRW employee. Just want to put that out there. And so I think you're very familiar with this, which is to say that every conference I attend, from the Secretary General to Prime Minister Trudeau, everyone's talking about the violence, the pushback, and how do we diagnose that? How do we understand where it's coming from? And then how do we flip the script? And you are, in fact, someone who has studied that, and you have all the answers. Tell us.
Oh, boy. All the answers in 5 minutes. Okay. An easy challenge. I mean, backlash, toxic masculinity, what does a researcher have to say about these things to inform advocacy going forward? I'll do my best and then open to, conversation and questions from the audience. And I just want to offer, for whatever it's worth, my solidarity to delegates in the room who are coming from locations where backlash means women human rights defenders jailed, killed, under direct attack, places where rights and legislative progresses have been rolled back concretely. This is something we're seeing. I see that. It's alarming, and it just for whatever it's worth, offer solidarity, and glad that we can be in at least this space together and hold each other up. At the same time, thanks. Thank you. At the same time, I want to express maybe a provocative idea that certain forms of backlash, leaving those aside, certain forms of just rhetorical backlash, online chatter, conservative talking heads backlash, I kind of welcome that stuff because it tells me that we're making some progress. It tells me that they're hearing us. And honestly, Lyric, as I was in the taxi to come to the airport, to come to Women Deliver, and okay, I'm a researcher on masculine norms, the driver had the conservative radio station on, and no joking, it was the guy saying, well, what's all this about toxic masculinity? This is a bunch of nonsense. I know masculine guys I know are awesome. And so that was the kind of thing where I had to think, they have no argument. If the argument is just, I'm masculine and I'm awesome, then we're going to win, right? What it is, they have no argument. What they have is a legacy and generations of unjust and unearned power and privileges, and I think they know that we're coming for those. And so that's part of where the backlash is coming from, and to the extent that I see that happening, I know it's hard. I know there are very serious outcomes of that language as well, but it tells me that we are challenging business as usual. They can't do business as usual anymore. They got to respond against these ideas. So I think the concrete thing that the research that I and my colleagues at Promundo and many of us in the room are doing is to demonstrate that any of this idea that rights and opportunities for all, rights and opportunities for women, non-binary, genderqueer folks who have not been awarded those rights so far, that this is some kind of a competition where there's just one single pizza and we all have to fight over the pieces, and then they're the pieces of rights and opportunities, and then they're gone forever. This is part of where backlash comes from, is the idea that there is this limited amount of rights and opportunities available. I know that's the case in a lot of locations, but the research, the evidence, the real truth underlying all of this, and I'll give some examples, is rights and opportunities aren't so much like pizza as they are, sunshine, something abundant that we all benefit from when it's around and that we all lose out from when it's not around. So, for instance, in research that Promundo and our partners around the world have been undertaking over many years, we've demonstrated so strongly that the greater extent to which someone agrees with those ideas that sometimes get called toxic masculinity, the idea that being a man means keeping all your emotions inside other than anger, means demonstrating your worth through physical violence and force, means really unhealthy sexual behaviors. The extent to which you demonstrate and agree with those kind of ideas is so strongly statistically linked with all sorts of harms and costs to men themselves, as well as, of course, the costs and harms that we know accrue to women and other folks. And this for example, in one of our studies called the man box, which has kind of been a phrase to describe these rigid masculine ideas that come from community organizing many years ago, that idea. shows that, yeah, like I was saying, those men who are most strongly inside that man box also demonstrate the greatest levels of depression, the greatest levels of suicide ideation, the greatest levels of other mental health challenges, of use and experiences of physical violence, of substance abuse, of traffic accidents, all these harms that accrue to men as well as to women and everybody, right? We've done a follow-up analysis in just 3 countries of those findings to actually accrue then economic costs as well to all of those outcomes. And just within the age group of 18 to 30-year-old men, just within 1 year, just in 3 countries, we can add up a total bill of $20 billion per year that come from those traffic accidents and those cost of life years lost of suicides and things like that, attributable only to the variable of the masculine attitudes. So these are, like I said, when the sunshine's gone, everybody misses the sunshine. When you have those rigid masculine ideas around, everybody suffers from those, including men. And so I feel like that's why we know we have the winning argument. The proof is there. But of course, the flip side is also true, that the benefits are there for everyone when those rights are more equal and more realized. So also coming to this session today, having just launched Promundo's report, State of the World's Fathers, and this is just one piece of evidence among many where we demonstrate that when those norms around unequal care work in the home, that idea that the laundry and the cleaning and caring for kids and feeding kids and cleaning up and everything is strictly women's responsibility, when we are able to alleviate that unjust amount of that work that is placed on women and have men fill a fully equal share, everybody reports that their relationship is stronger, their relationship with their children is better, the violence tends to reduce in those situations. And so I just feel that if we resist the kind of scarcity idea, call upon us all to recognize, this is kind of a catchphrase at this point, but the gender equality is not a zero-sum game, right, where somebody has to lose in order for someone to win, that really we have the truth on our side, that dismantling these rigid, harmful gender norms, guaranteeing rights for everyone, shows these broad benefits to all. And I hope that helps inform the conversation a little bit.
Yes, let's get you on a radio show. Get you piped in the taxi. Lopa, I think this is a very good segue to you. So Lopa is the director of the Civil Society Division at UN Women. If you don't know her and her team, you need to. And I know that you've been thinking about all of the things that you've just heard as you confront the question of how do we honor the legacy of Beijing next year in light of the very real fact that the backlash in these movements and increasingly governments headed by misogynistic, patriarchal, violent men, I won't name anyone in particular, is a real risk to an intergovernmental process. So I think that you and your colleagues and some of our friends in champion governments and certainly feminist civil society have been thinking about ways that we can circumnavigate those forces and still have our moment to break new ground. What are you doing to ensure that spaces like this one can control that narrative, and how can this group plug in?
Thank you so much, Lyric, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for this panel and the opportunity to talk to all of you. So I want to start by saying that next year, 25 years, is really a moment to talk about the fact that everybody on this panel has spoken about, which is that activism matters, movements matter. That is what creates change. And the 25th anniversary celebration of not just Beijing next year, but next year is also the 10th year anniversary of UN Women, which was born of movements. Next year is also the 20th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325 on center staging women's participation in peace processes. That was born of movements. Next year is also the 5th year review of the Sustainable Development Goals, and the fact that the Sustainable Development Goals have the aspiration of leaving no one behind is because it was born of movements. And therefore, to center stage the role of movements and activism in ensuring that 25 years after Beijing, when we see pushback, I actually want to talk about beyond backlash to pushback, because pushback is about strategies of erosion. And so what we are seeing is not just backlash, but pushback in terms of eroding what we have achieved. But it's also a moment to celebrate what we have achieved, because unless we celebrate what we have achieved, we do not know what to hang on to, preserve, strengthen, expand. And that is exactly what the Beijing 25 moment is about. What we have ongoing right now, I will talk a little bit about process, and then I will talk actually about what the stage will be. So the process right now leading into next year is that there are national reviews on, which are taking place. The national reports are coming in. There will also be regional reviews. So the process has both an intergovernmental stream, and it also has a civil society mobilization activism stream. So the intergovernmental stream is that the national reviews are taking place, then there will be the regional reviews leading into CSW. The mobilization stream is alongside the intergovernmental regional reviews. There will be 5 multi-stakeholder civil society consultations in the 5 regions alongside the regional reviews, and then there will be CSW. Then leading from CSW, we will go into the Global Forum. In Paris, in July 2020, we will have the dates to be announced soon. This is the Global Forum co-hosted by France and Mexico. It will kick off, it will begin in Mexico, and it will culminate in Paris. And this is going to be the center staging of activism, mobilization to plug the deficits of accountability and implementation. We do not need more new commitments. We have enough commitments, as you have been saying, Mabel, as you talked about, Jama. Laws are in place. What we need to see is the integrity of action and the ability to plug the deficits of accountability and a space to call out an end to impunity for lack of accountability. And that's the space. So the Global Forum will center stage civil society activism. Civil society will lead and develop the Global Forum. I will talk about how that will happen, but they will lead and develop the Global Forum. The idea is to center stage youth activism, is to reflect the world as we see it today. The strength of LGBTI movements, the strength of indigenous peoples movements, the strength of disability rights movements, the strength of young people's activism, the strength of refugee immigrant rights movements, to center stage people's movements, women's rights movements, youth movements as at the forum. And what we want coming out of it is action coalitions. Multi-stakeholder action coalitions with civil society, with governments, with industry, with other stakeholders on some critical issues that are the most egregious barriers to gender equality. That will come out of the regional processes and the national reviews and the global review. But we already know what those are, right? We know that there's a deficit in pay equality. We know that women are profoundly underrepresented in leadership and participation. We know what the situation on ending violence is. We know what the gap areas are. So Coming out, nevertheless, we will be able to sharpen what these coalitions will be coming out of the regional and the national review processes and the global review, so that what we go into the global forum with is already a mobilizing of these action coalitions, which will begin through the multi-stakeholder reviews, going into CSW, which will be a supra-CSW, because it's the Beijing 25 CSW, and then in Mexico, we will have an opportunity to really have the discussion around the coalitions, which will then get launched in Paris at the Global Forum. What we will also look at, what the Global Forum will also be, is that we will use technology to ensure that people can participate from wherever they are. Of course, it will be a physical moment of gathering, but also that from wherever they are beaming in, beaming out, people are able to participate. There will be satellite sessions, and we will have a torch that will be lit in Mexico that will then travel between Mexico and the forum in Paris. It will go to countries, and countries that will accept the torch will be satellite sessions and will commit to be in the coalitions of action. And then we move into the Global Forum. Coming out of the Global Forum, those champion states that will be at the Global Forum will take those commitments to those coalitions of actions into the UN General Assembly in 2020, which will have a high-level day of commemoration for Beijing 25, but then it will go beyond. So that between 2020 and 2025, we have revolutionary actions for implementation. So these action coalitions, not 15, but 5 or 6 action coalitions with financial commitment, with deadlines for delivery, between 2020 and 2025, an accelerated program of action, so that from 2025 to 2030, we actually see dramatic, sustainable progress, so that we don't get to 2030 saying gender equality is still unachieved and unattainable. That's where we are, and we look forward to your support, to your participation, to your activist leadership.
Fantastic. I love that. I love that we're flipping the script, and we're not letting this be a stage for negotiating rights away among
I want
the bad
to
apples.
just hold this up. This is
We've got signage. We've got buttons.
the generation equality.
Oh, you need the. Yeah.
Generation equality. This is the theme for Beijing 25. That is, this generation will achieve equality at one level, or equality now in this generation.
Fantastic. It's interesting too, I think, that that you're exploring this model of having the champion governments kind of compete with each other to host this, as opposed to we all show up in New York with our dread and watch the governments kind of negotiate it away to the lowest common denominator. I know that I've heard Mexico has a feminist foreign policy. France has just launched a feminist foreign policy and is doing some great stuff on the G7 stage. So it's really heartening to know that you all are thinking about how do you reward that behavior and make this sort of a race to the top instead of the sort of upside down and inverse dynamic that we've experienced lately. We're coming close to time, so I would like to invite those of you in the audience who have questions to please ask your question, and please do introduce yourself. We do have one passed mic that will be migrating around the audience, thanks to Tracy. Hi, Tracy. So please do raise your hand. I saw one here, 2 there, and then there was one third here. We'll go 3, and then we'll come to the panel. Hopefully we'll have, we probably only have time for 1 round.
Hi, my name is Risa Levine from Resolve, the National Infertility Association. We're based in Virginia, but I'm from New York. I hope I don't offend anybody, but this panel is called 24 years later, Are Women's Rights Still Human Rights? We talk about the power of storytelling. You talked about movement. Movements are created by people through their stories. We didn't name the person who said women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. We can't tell our stories with, and we can't own our future unless we respect and own our past. I think that it was monumental when Hillary Clinton said women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. Everybody downstairs in the exhibit hall is using a variation of that phrase. You're going to teach your daughter about Malala one day. Her book is called I Am Malala. Why can't we name our feminist icons the way men talk about Yogi Berra? You know, I mean, we all know about the Arc of Justice as Martin Luther King. We know Ask Not as John F. Kennedy. Why aren't we talking about in the very session named after her own quote, why didn't we name her once?
Thank you. And I think we had one right back there. Yes, just behind you.
Hi, thank you. My question is about the rights framework, and I appreciate the generation equality conversation too, and all of the different issues that are being raised in this context of rights, but also would be interested in whether 25 years later, rights versus justice versus equality, what is the conversation now? What are the words and the narrative we should be thinking about in the next 25 years?
Great, thank you. So one on the frame, and then we had one question over here. Yes. And then we'll go to the panel. Thank you, Tracy. You're getting your steps in. Back a little bit. No, yeah.
Noli Nonbeliever from Diva for Equality. I just wanted to say thank you for the panel and for the moment, and to say it's really important also to get her stories correct as well, because Hillary Clinton herself acknowledges that phrase came from women's movements from Asia and Pacific. So I think it's important to talk about all of the thousands and millions of women who've been part of this movement. So as part of that, I guess my question is around how do we really ensure that in a process as global as this, that we make sure that the grassroots civil society, that indigenous women, that LGBTQI women and people and others are solidly in the center of a really important set of questions that we need to ask in the middle of a really dangerous time for us in the women's movement. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to ask the panel. We're going to go down the line and answer. You can speak to all three of the questions. You can pick one. But I would like you to also make sure that if there was one burning thing that you didn't say in your earlier interventions, that you say it now, because we are very close to time. Coming back to you, Jama, please close us out.
So probably not a response to the question, but also a question that I had listening to the process of the journey leading to Beijing 25. Because we're coming from a context where a lot of these deliberations and discussions happen and we're not involved. So it feels like we're living in two parallel worlds where government and the state is doing one thing, civil society is doing another thing. So there's really no or not enough intersection between these two entities to allow us to really feed the information, the work, the outcomes we're getting from the grassroots communities into what eventually becomes policy. So I totally agree with that. I'm looking for a response to that as well, and understanding that my country people here would also agree. I mean, we hear about things that are coming up around women's rights and policies that are being developed, but you have key women's rights organizations in the country that are not involved at all. Nobody is consulted, nobody is invited, and usually the response is, we don't need to invite you, you need to come into the space. But if we do not know that these things are happening, we cannot come into the space. And it becomes even harder when you're a young organization full of young people, where there's still a gap between the generations that are working on women's rights. It was really heartening to hear Mabel talk about how there's a vibrant youth movement, you know, learning from what existed in the past. Unfortunately, we can't really talk about that. There's still a very huge divide, and I think this is something we need to bridge as well. And moving forward, that's one of the things we need to look at. How do we ensure the torch we're passing from country to country, within our countries as well, within our communities, we're ensuring that when I come on board, I'm not starting anew. When another generation comes on board, they're not starting anew. The work needs to continue. We need to pick up from where some people are passing the torch down. And I think that's really the reflection we need to have as well, to see how those who are vibrant right now, who have all the time, right now. The passion, the energy, they're able to bring themselves to these spaces and dedicate themselves to the work, how we are all very much involved. And just to say this, I hear the forum in Paris and I think, oops, visas. Coming to Women Deliver, there's a lot of young leaders who couldn't make it here because they weren't deemed worthy of getting into this country. So I think issues around access, to the spaces where these conversations are happening is something we need to reflect on. So it's not just about, that is important. We go into the countries, we learn about them. But what we realize also is when you get to the highest levels, it's the same voices, it's the same people, it's the same faces, it's the same stories, it's the same experiences. Our experiences are as diverse as we are many. So I'm talking based on my experiences working on FGM. We look at that. The struggle is one, but the experiences are different. The stories are so different. You talk to one survivor, the story is different from the other survivor. So I think in line with the question around how do we move forward as well, those are some of the things we need to think about. Inclusion needs to be real inclusion. We cannot keep listening to the same voices over and over and expect that things are going to change. Thanks.
Yes. Mabel.
Well, I think our challenge is at regional level. First of all, at national level, because there is a lot of women leaving behind, okay? So we need to ensure that in this movement, we are having in Latin America and the Caribbean, most of the countries prepare the reports without our voices. They are talking now us, so we prepare, so let's convalidate it. This is not really participation. This is only things that you are participating. So this is something that we need to denounce, and we need to really push that it's not going to be anymore. But so we need to make shadow reports. Sorry, because I know no one more wants to speak about shadow reports, but still we need them because we are not included in the official reports. So this is something that we need to do. Second, at regional level, we need to be sure that all those groups of women that used not to be incorporated are there. For example, in our region, we have the Afro-descendant, the indigenous, we have the disabled women, we have the migrants now. That is a huge problem, as you know, in the region, completely different from others, but it is. And so we need to be sure that they are incorporated. And to be incorporated is not only to travel to Paris, because I think to go to Paris is something maybe interesting for tourists. But what is important is to say what happened in Paris, in your country. In order, all of us, we know what are the commitments our governments do there. In many years, after Cairo and Beijing, in my country, we were the government was against all of us, all the feminists. So the most important work we did was some of us going to the conferences, bringing the knowledge, having big alliances with the media, and saying in the country, this was telling there, and here is happening this. So I think this is the important issue, because if not, governments are saying, oh, everything is okay, or they commit, but really they are not. So I think this is an important issue, and more than the issue to go and be there. But those that are going need to be really watchdogs, looking what happened and bring it to the countries. This is our role. This is our role. It's not to say, we have been here, what nice, the government. This is not the role of the civil society. The real civil society is the civil society that says what is not true and what we need to push for.
Perfect. Critical society. Brian.
one quick additional idea to share in the room, and that's the idea that we can't tell a single story. This idea comes to me from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, to share the name of where it comes to me. There might be a prior history to that idea that I'm not aware of, but I think what the idea that we can't tell a single story, there isn't a single solution to the issues we're talking about. Instead, it's plurality, it's yes and, it's all of the above. That's something that's inspiring to me coming out of this panel. It can be that we hold up the voices of prominent political leaders that represent what we would hope to see, and it also, yes and, needs to be absolutely those grassroots activists and people whose names will never be on any kind of news coverage or high profile. It's all of those, and I'm really, really encouraged hearing your feedback, Lopa, and hearing Jama's idea too about working together in coalitions and specifically re-energizing the activist roots of our movement, keeping the focus there. I'm excited to see what a Paris convention around that idea can produce. I think coming to a convening like this one, I hope it's not controversial to say that I don't think that the great injustices that we're facing in the world are going to be development programmed into oblivion, right? Right? And I think kind of what you're sharing, Mabel, is we have to go to the halls of power and make a demand, rather than just taking whatever scraps they provide to us as a part of the business as usual that allows us to feel like maybe we're making tiny incremental progress. I'm really excited about what that can look like and hope to be a part of it in years to come. And I apologize if I left anything else out.
Perfect. Thank you. Lopa.
I'm going to talk actually about the very important question that was raised around rights versus justice, and then I'll address all of the questions around the Global Forum and some of the convening issues that Jama spoke about. So thank you very much actually for raising that question. And I want to talk not so much about rights versus justice, because actually that's not what the issue is. The issue that we are really grappling with at this moment is law versus justice. Because where we have come to right now, for all of these years, starting with Beijing, when we center stage the discussion around rule of law and access to justice. And that has always been together, right? We've never talked about rule of law without simultaneously talking about access to justice. But what has happened within this pushback, what has happened with democracy in disarray, what has happened with the shrinking space is that law has become, in some cases, a contradiction to justice. Because law is being used to actually undermine justice. So you have laws criminalizing democratic activity, you have laws criminalizing sexual rights, you have laws criminalizing debate, dissent, and civic and feminist activism. So the discussion, to take it back to the idea of justice and justice frameworks, which is upheld in so many ways, Ms. Bachelet talked about this, which is upheld through the multilateral, global, regional, national frameworks of justice. And the attack on multilateralism, the attack on looking at multilateralism as being in confrontation with national interest. That is a direct attack on eroding the system of legislative framework. So if that is eroded, then there is no basis on which to make claims anymore. And therefore the need to preserve the strength of multilateralism through activism, through feminist mobilizing is absolutely crucial and will be a driving stream of the Global Forum, which actually takes me to the Global Forum. To your point, Jama, this is one of the fundamental roles of UN Women, which is convening. The point that you were making that, government sit here, civil society sits here, and never the twain shall meet, that is actually, this is the role that UN Women plays in terms of convening, and that's bringing together policymakers and governments with civil society, with feminist leaders, with activists, and so on. That we do that. That's part of the whole process in any case, but particularly for the Global Forum. And the strength, and why are we having the Global Forum? The Global Forum is so that the agenda is set by civil society, so that the agenda is set by the young people, so that the success of activism that has achieved grassroots change in communities can be scaled up, because that's what's not happening. And so those action coalitions scale up what is good. And this is a Mexico-France civil society convening. Visas is not going to be an issue. The whole point is that this is about bringing together, center staging that activism, but also being mindful of the fact that people, wherever they are, this is a global moment. Our executive director talks about there has to be a moment when the world jumps together to bring down the pillars of patriarchy. This is going to be such a moment when the world jumps together to bring down the pillars of patriarchy. So that convening, the focus, to the point that Nolene raised, but also others have raised here, the issue of inclusion. You know, exclusion is political, and inclusion is also political. So the participation and the intersectional, cross-sectional participation, expanding the constituency of advocates has to be central. Just one procedural point, Mabel, for the Beijing 25 process, civil society reports are coming in, and they will be included in UN Women's Global Report, as you know. They're also going to be on the UN Women website, so civil society reports will inform the reporting. But more than the civil society reports, civil society inputs and the shaping and leadership of the global forum, so that the action coalitions are truly led by by those that are going to take it forward, which includes member states, but includes civil society and includes other actors in society.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lopa. Thank you, everyone who's joined us. This is Women Deliver, so we're very solutions-oriented. We will be your organizers, which is ICRW and CCID. My colleague Jude is here. We will be putting together a list of all of these great ideas that have come out of this session. And as I hear it, it's civil society-led, so we're in charge. So we're going to be coming up with that list of demands. It's about visas. It's about civil society setting the agenda. It's about using that media spotlight to elevate and include movements and intersections as we know that they play out, but also to shine a light on bad behavior and call that out and end impunity as you have suggested. So please join us. You can come talk to me at the end of the session, to Jude, to any of the speakers, and we will look forward to being in touch with you in these next exciting 13 months.